People have always asked me like how some like roughneck country boy from Western Massachusetts turned from, and it's kind of a crazy journey. I mean, it's still ongoing for sure. Both sets of great-great-grandparents on my mother's side fled the Holocaust from southern Poland. They were from the same town in southern Poland. They both settled in Brooklyn. And my great-grandparents, even though they were from the same town in Poland, had never met until they came to Brooklyn. So they met in Brooklyn. They were married very young, and then they made the trek to Pittsfield, Massachusetts. My great-grandfather was an engineer for General Electric, and my great-grandmother was a nurse. And they ended up having 7 beautiful children of their own. And so that's how my maternal grandfather was born. He went on to marry, I don't know much about the origins. All I know is that it was unacceptable by my great-grandparents for their children to marry anybody except a Jew. My grandfather and my grandmother had my biological mother, and then I showed up. I have an older brother who is 29, my older sister's 28, and the baby, I am 27. When I was young, about a year old, my parents, they decided they couldn't take care of me, so I was basically placed on the doorstep of my grandparents' house in a basket with a bottle full of Coca-Cola. And my grandparents, being older at that age, being older at that age, decided they also couldn't take care of me, you know, and so they reached out to family, and my great aunt, who's an amazing woman, said, you know, I'll take on the burden. I'll take this from here. And so she carried the torch, and so I've lived with my great aunt. I call her mom ever since I was 16 months old. And she went on to meet my great uncle. They got married after, you know, I was already in the picture, and so she was a single mom for a while, but she met my great uncle, and he is the guy I call dad now. So that's kind of really where the origins began. I grew up on the outskirts of a rural community. I grew up hunting and fishing and driving trucks and running around in the woods and playing like bad guys and cops and robbers and army dudes. And you know, we didn't really have much money. We come from pretty humble beginnings. My mom raised me to be like a housewife, but my dad taught me to be like a manly man, right? Like, you work, you know, you fix cars, you mow the lawn, you fix anything that's broken. You know, I've been hunting since I was probably 6 or 7 years old. Took me fishing. A lot of my Friday nights growing up, like, were in like cornfields with like trucks and bonfires. And then as I got older, I started to question, you know, like the bigger things in life. You know, like when somebody gets older, 7, 8 years old, they start to get a sense of who they are, and they start to question the bigger things. And I think this time for me was really like when I was about 7 or 8. I remember going to school, and people were talking about doing all these things at church, and they're like getting super excited. And I went home and I asked my mom, like, what are we? You know, like, am I supposed to be doing these things that kids at school are doing? And she said, look, you know, I'm Jewish, your dad's Catholic, and you have the ability to choose. Like, you can do whatever you want. You want to go to church, go to church. You want to go to a temple, we'll go to a temple. She gave me the opportunity, and in my formative mind, I was thinking, like, well, if I choose to be Jewish, like, we'll probably still celebrate Christmas, but I'll get more gifts. So like, at least we should be Jewish. So at that point, like, my decision to be Jewish was solely based on how many presents I would get. I was very active in sports. I was big into soccer, ski racing, and rugby. I ended up playing on like the national and international levels for those sports. But it wasn't all, you know, hot apple cider and pumpkin patches. I mean, there was difficult times. You know, I didn't grow up with too many friends. My backyard was 450 acres of like a mountain, and my front yard was a dirt road, and beyond that was a cow pasture and another 450 acres. So I kind of really had to learn how to be okay, like, being by myself. And that was tough, because like at this point, my parents made it pretty clear that I had a brother and a sister that like my other parents elected to keep. So a big thing of mine was always accepting or trying kind of to reconcile the fact that like I felt rejected. And that was tough, especially when the only friends you have are the cows that you run away from, or like, the sheep that you chase. I spent a lot of time in my own mind, and I think that's really what forced me to ask these difficult questions, like ask the questions about who I am and what I do and what I want and my place on this earth. I give credit to my parents. They have been the hardest working people I know. I mean, working 60, 70-hour weeks just to put a roof over my head and clothes on my back and food in my belly. So, but it was tough growing up because, like, if I wanted something, I had to earn it, right? So, like, I started walking dogs when I was 8 years old, and when I was 9 years old, I remember I used to go around and I used to weed whack some of my neighbors' lawns. I remember I bought my first dirt bike when I was 12 years old, and I worked for like 2 summers. And then I remember I bought my first car when I was 15. I didn't even have a license. I didn't even have a permit, but I had worked so hard, and I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna have this set together, and I'll never forget the day I turned, I think it's 16 or 16 and a half. The day I turned 16 and a half, I think you're allowed to have your license. I remember on that birthday, I took my license test, I came back, and my car was registered, insured, everything. And the day that I was legally allowed to get my license and drive a car by myself, I did. And so my parents never allowed me to be comfortable, like, having things afforded to me, right? Like, if I wanted something, I had to earn it. I had no choice. They didn't have the money to do it. So the hardships I endured, combined with, like, the isolation and, like, not growing up with too many kids around and having to be alone, really forced myself to, like, create this, like, warrior mentality, right? Because, like, some people can get lost in their own mind, and especially, like, growing up with the hardships that I did, it's very easy to feel sorry for yourself. And I was unwilling to, at any point, feel sorry for myself. Like pulling yourself up by the bootstraps is really kind of just a mantra of mine, because at the end of the day, like, you can have people who love and care about you, but the only person that you can rely on fully and 100% is you, is yourself. Yeah. People have always asked me, like, how some, like, roughneck country boy from Western Massachusetts turned from, and it's kind of a crazy journey. I mean, it's still ongoing for sure. When I got to high school, I got to the point where I really started questioning who I was, like the deeper things. Like, I knew there was a God. I knew that, I had Jewish origins. I knew my mother was Jewish, but I didn't really know what that meant. And so, like, I'm the type of guy that doesn't like to not know. So I went and I had my mom drive me to a Reformed temple in town, in Pittsfield, and I walked in and said, I want to be part of your temple. I want to learn more about Judaism. I went and I joined this Reformed temple. For the 4 years that I was in high school, I was in a Jewish youth group, a Reformed Jewish youth group. It really only got my feet wet, and it gave me just, like, the slightest taste of Judaism, but it didn't answer the big questions. So after high school, I ended up going to college in Boston, and I remember this guy Alex Friedman, who's still a good friend of mine today, was like, hey man, you gotta come to this rabbi's house on Friday, right? And I mean, this is my 3rd week of college. I'm this, like, homegrown country boy. Like, I show up to campus with a truck, like this old beat up truck, and like I'm finally out of my small podunk town, and I'm like, go to a rabbi's house. Like, I want to party, man. Like, I want to live college, right? And he was like, yeah, but there's free food. And I was like, what? Like, okay. So, a college student, I was like, okay, free food. So Friday night, I meet up with the following week, I meet up with Alex at this bus stop. We take this bus to this rabbi who ended up being my rabbi for college, Rabbi Hanano Wiener. He runs H Campus Boston, and he was like, I walked up to his house. I think I was wearing, if I remember correctly, khaki pants and a red polo that had a Marine Corps symbol on it. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's what I was wearing. And I remember I, like, walked up to his house and I, like, shook his hand. I was like, hey, great to meet you. Thanks for having me. And then, like, there was this awkward moment where, like, I went to go shake his wife's hand, and it was kind of like, dude, don't touch my wife. He didn't actually say, I don't think that was verbatim what he said, but that was the gist. So this was really my first Shabbos, right? Like, my first genuine Shabbos. Like, he was like, yeah, no phones at the table. And I was like, oh, dude, this this is not cool, right? And that was really, that Shabbos right there was really the turning point. Like I went to that Shabbos and I never turned back. 2014, I went to yeshiva for the first time. I spent about 3 months in Aish Torah studying just the basics, like really getting my feet wet. You know what I mean? Like I had spent about a year of spending Shabbos with Rabbi Wiener, but I mean, I wasn't keeping kosher at all. Like I wasn't keeping Shabbos, I wasn't keeping kosher. I was like super Bel Tshuva. And so 2014, I spent my first summer in Israel. It was an incredible opportunity. 2016, I went again for a summer, spent another summer at Aish. But still, up until this point, I still wasn't really on the path. Like I was walking around the Rova in Jerusalem with like my big high ankled Chippewas. I wore like cargo shorts, my A pie jersey, and like an American flag, like cowboy hat, and I like would wrap like an Israeli flag around me, right? Like that's how I walked around Jerusalem. Like, you know, sometimes I would rock the tzitzit, sometimes I wouldn't, but I had no idea what any of that stuff even was. It's so bad to say it now, but like when I would get back from Israel, the first thing I would do, I would go to Wendy's and I'd get a bacon cheeseburger. Like I was still at this point, kosher was not a thing. Keeping Shabbos was not a thing. When I was there, it was like I was like, okay, this is cool. But going back to the States, I was like, so then I ended up going back to the States. I finished college in 2017. And in 2017, when I graduated, I started the workforce. I stayed in Boston. I ended up having some odd jobs. And I ended up working at this like financial consulting firm. I'll never forget my Rabbi Wiener said, look, I love you, you're still my bro, you're always welcome here, but I do undergrads, I need to put you in touch with someone who does postgrad. So I ended up learning under two rabbis, Rabbi J.P. Katz and Rabbi Yitzhak Greenblatt. This was really where my journey started to pick up, right? So learning under Rabbi Greenblatt was amazing. Every week, Wednesday, I would go, and we would just study anything that we wanted to, right? They gave classes, shears. And Thursdays was Gemara with the boys. At some point during like middle to end of 2018, Rabbi Greenblatt asked me, what are you doing this weekend? And I was like, I don't know, probably going to the football game. And he was like, you should come to the Shabbaton. I was like, what's that? And he's like, it's where you hang out with a bunch of Jews for the weekend. And I was like, awesome, where is it? And he was like, it's at this place called Lakewood. And I was like, ooh, what's that? And he was like, you'll love it. I remember I got off work like early on that Friday and I drove down to Lakewood, and I'll never forget, I got there like right as Shabbos was starting. Like I got there like minutes before, right? I didn't have much time. All I knew was I had this address, I had to go drop my bags off, and then there was this shul. I had the name of the shul. So I drive down to Lakewood, and I'm like, I noticed like we're not in Kansas anymore. Like this place is Jewish, right? So I remember I showed up, and every house was just so nice. So I remember I showed up to my host family's house. I dropped my my luggage off, parked the car, and I was like, hey, where's this shul? And they're like, oh, just go up 2 streets and take a left. Don't go into this shul or this shul, because there's like 40 shuls in like a 2-block radius. It's crazy. So I remember it was pouring rain out. All I had was my suit, because when I left Boston, it was sunny, but it was pouring rain out. And I remember that I was like, well, I don't want to get wet and be soaked while I pray. I was like, oh, I have an umbrella. So I remember I grabbed this umbrella out of my car, and I'm just walking through the streets of Lakewood. Shabbos has already come. And I'm seeing like little women and children and babies like tough through this rain without an umbrella. They just got this was the first time also I saw one of those, you know how they make those rain jackets that go over your black hat? I was like, what's up with these hoods, right? So I remember I was walking through the streets, and these kids are just toughing it out. These women are just toughing it out. And I was like, something's not right? So I was just getting into the shul. I was like literally like maybe 100 yards from the shul. I remember, and I'm getting all these weird looks. I remember I like collapsed the umbrella, I wrapped it up, and I just chucked it into the woods. And I was like, I'll come get you later, don't worry. And this is where the Shabbaton started. And I remember this Shabbaton, like I think honestly was the point where it changed my life, and it kind of determined the path I wanted to take in Judaism. So get there Friday night. We have an incredible, davening service, incredible Ma'ariv, incredible Kabbalat Shabbat. And we go to our host. I remember I ate by a family by the name of Gaunter, Akiva Gaunter, I ate by. And Mr. Gaunter asked me to share my story up until that point. And I basically came and said, hey, I just graduated college, I'm working in finance, and I'm currently enlisting in the military. Whatever, I told the story, we had a great Shabbat meal, beautiful home, beautiful family. Wake up the next morning, and I remember we were doing chakras, and we went to this giant shul. And the shul had like 300 or 400 people in there. And I remember I was sitting up towards the front, and there was this big rabbi, I think his name was Rabbi Simcha Cohen, I could be wrong, but that's what comes to memory. And this rabbi called me up on stage. He called me and this Moroccan guy up to stage, right? So he's got 2 brown Jews up there, which was hilarious. And he was like, I remember he was like, hold my back, support my back. So I remember he's like rocking and we're supporting him, and he's like, we're just like swaying with him, and he's like giving me this shear, this Devar Torah, right? And then he at some point stopped swaying, and he looks at me and he was like, what's your name? And I was like, I'm Yaakov. And he was like, he asked me a couple questions and I gave some answers. And then he was like, so you're gonna go to yeshiva in Israel very soon, right? And I was like, yeah, of course. Because I'm like on this like spiritual high, like I'm vibing, right? And then like after he turns to the other kid and starts asking him the same questions, I was like, oh dude, like I just promised this rabbi in front of 400 witnesses that I'm gonna go to yeshiva in Israel. Like I was like, how am I gonna do this, right? Then Motzi Shabbos comes, right? And we go to this, I think they call it the doctor's office, but we go to this guy who's this like legendary dude, owned a pharmaceutical company, sold it, has this massive house and has a shul in his basement. So we go to this guy's place, absolute rock star. And it's Motzi Shabbos, this is the first time I saw kosher pigs in a blanket, mind blowing. So I go there, and I remember we're like dancing, it's crazy. And I get a tap on my shoulder, and I turn around, and it's my rabbi, and it's Akiva Gaunter. And Akiva has in his hand a pair of tefillin. And he was like, Yaakov, like, I want, this is for you. He was like, this guy was amazing. He was like, I ran to the shopkeeper's shop. I begged him to open this, even though it's not supposed to be on Motzi Shabbos. He opened it. He let me buy this. This is for you. You need to rap every day, right? You have to promise me you're going to rap every day. And I was like, roger that, you know what I mean? So that was crazy. I get my first pair of tefillin. I'm on the spiritual high. Sunday comes. Sunday was, we got up, davened, prayed, we walked down Lakewood a little bit, and we take a tour of BMG. Then we spoke with the Rosh Yeshiva of BMG, or one of the head rabbis of BMG, and I remember we got a private conference with him, right? And I ended up sitting right next to him, and we took this photo at the end, and like in the photo, it's me like with my arm around this big rabbi, right? Like being crazy. Anyways, long story short, that picture ended up on like the front page of like the Lakewood Times, like that following week, or whatever the newspaper is, right? I don't know what it's called, but I remember I got so many pictures from like my host family, like, you're on the newspaper. It was crazy. So that happened, and then I remember we had this final luncheon with this really nice family, beautiful home again. And at this luncheon, I remember towards the very end, this big rabbi. Now look at this guy, was not frail, but a skinny guy with, the black hat, looked like your typical rabbi, long white beard, but he had the most pronounced, deep voice I've ever heard. Like if this guy wanted to be a country singer, I would compare him to Josh Turner. Right, this guy has a crazy deep voice, and he gives this anomaly about baseball, right? He gives this anomaly about baseball, and then he gives this speech about how he was on a plane, he was trying to get to the back to daven or something like that, and he was going against the flow, and this flight attendant was like, sir, you're going against the flow, and he said, lady, that's the story of my life, right? And he compared it to being like a salmon swimming upstream. This guy ended up being Rav Nota Schiller. He's the Rosh Yeshiva of Oorah in Yerushalayim. And at the very end, I remember seeing people getting in line to like talk to this guy. And I go up to my rabbi and I was like, what are they doing with this? Like, why are they talking to this guy? Like, is he famous? And they were like, my rabbi was like, no, they're getting brachas. And I was like, what's a bracha? And he was like, you just go stand in line and ask him for a bracha, right? So I go, it's finally my turn. I was like, hey, rabbi, can I have a bracha? And he was like, you should have, you should be zocher to come to Israel and study at Oorah. And he gave like, and I think that's what he said. Anyways, long story short, I don't know verbatim, but I know what he basically said was, you should come to Israel, and you should come study at Oorah, and that was my bracha, right? And I go back to Rabbi Greenblatt, and I was like, he's like, how was it? I was like, I think he just tried to recruit me, right? So, what? So anyways, long story short, so we're driving back to Boston. I remember I got to Boston like 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, called Rabbi Greenblatt. I said, Rabbi, I want you to pick me up for the earliest chakras tomorrow. I want to go daven. I want to go wrap tefillin. He's like, take it slow. You don't have to do this every day. I go, I don't care. I want to do it tomorrow. So I ended up doing that for 5-7 weeks maybe. So it came around Hanukkah time, and I remember, so I would have to I'd get picked up, I'd go daven by the Boston Rebbe Shul in Brookline, and then I would take an hour T-ride to work. And I remember I showed up to work like 3 minutes late, and I walk into the firm, and I get dragged into this office with like the head guy of the firm and this guy from HR. And they're like, why were you late? And I was like, I was praying. And they're like, well, we pray. We're never late. And I was like, really? You're Jewish? And they're like, no. And I was like, well, then this doesn't add up. So, and they were like, long story short, they had this like intense discussion with me, and they're like, look, either you find a different time to pray, or like you find a different job, right? So I sat and I thought, and I was like, thanks for the opportunity for letting me work here. It's been great. And we parted ways, and I was like, we're out. This was kind of, everything started coming together. I remember because I was doing the enlistment process, and they were trying to get me like a boot camp. And the apartment I was staying in, like they were doing like a bunch of stuff they weren't supposed to be doing. They were like smoking a lot of weed, and they were just doing all this stuff that could endanger my ability to enlist. And so I really was uncomfortable. My roommates were pretty hostile. They weren't respectful of my religious beliefs. I was like, I don't want to stay here. I'm gonna go home. So I went home, and I didn't have the chutzpah to tell my parents that I had lost my job. So I remember I went home, they're like, why are you home? And I was like, oh, my job gave me time off for Hanukkah. Can you believe it? It's so great. So I remember I called my landlord and I said, look, there's all these things that are breaking the lease. The roommates are hostile, this and that. I need to get out. I'm gonna find you a bunch of sublets. So I remember I brought this person like 8 or 9 sublets, and at the end of the day, they were like, we're not gonna let you sublet. And then finally, they were like, if you leave, like, we'll come after you in some way, shape, or form, whether it's legal or whatever. Like, and in my mind, I'm like, I gotta leave. So I remember I was just like, hey, thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for letting me live here. Yeah, so then I went back, I grabbed all my stuff in my apartment. I came back home, and my parents, like I remember I left all my stuff in my truck because I didn't want my parents to know, and I would sneak it in as they were in bed. I remember I called my rabbi. I said, Rabbi, I have no apartment. I have no job. I can't continue lying to my parents. What can I do? And he was like, no way, Yaakov, that's crazy. That's awesome. Right? He's like, that's awesome. Good news. I was like, what? I was like, I just told you like my life's falling apart. And you're like, oh, it's great. He was like, we have this trip coming up to Israel in like a week, right? I'll get you a ticket. It's like for 3 weeks, you're gonna love it, right? And I was like, okay. So I remember he like booked me a ticket that day. And I was leaving in like 3 days. And I remember it was like just before Christmas. And I told my parents, I was like, hey, I'm going to Israel. They're like, what about your job? We're like, what are you gonna do? I was like, I'm gonna go do some postgraduate studies. I tried to like fluff it up, and they're like, what do you mean? What are you gonna be studying? I was like, I want to be studying the Torah, right? Jewish stuff. And they were like, I'll never forget. My mom cried. My dad was like, you're ruining your life. This is unacceptable. Like, because at this point, I was the first person in my family to graduate high school. I was my first person in my family to graduate college, right? I had a real, I still do, but at that point, I had a bright future, and I still, thank God I still do. And God willing, it should continue to be bright. But they were like, you're throwing away your future, all of this. My dad was like, if you do this, like, you're not welcome back in my house, right? I was like, all right, well, thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for being my parents. Thanks for putting a roof over my head and like clothes on my back for the last 18 years. I have to do this. So I left. And that was one of the hardest things I had to do, was watching because the thing is, like, it was right before Christmas. That's a big family time for us. My parents, I'm all they have. We don't really have a whole lot of family out there. So leaving them on what's supposed to be one of our biggest family holidays was tough. I remember my mom cried and my dad was upset, but I commend them for giving me that push, because had they not given me that ultimatum, maybe I wouldn't have been so certain as to this is what I want. Yeah, so then I went and I hopped on a plane, and the next day I was in Eretz Yisrael. It ended up being a 3-week trip to Oorah. It was like they called it the Mentors Mission, and it was like a bunch of yeshiva guys that got hooked up with a mentor who was like this crazy successful Jewish businessman. So it was great. We got to explore Eretz Yisrael. We studied at the yeshiva. And I was like, you know what? I'm not leaving. 3 weeks ended up turning into like 6 months. And at this point, I had been attempting to, keep Shabbos, keep kosher. I spent about 6 months there. I made some of the best friends I could have ever asked for. I really learned a lot. I learned how to daven. I learned a lot about myself. And I remember at this point, I was studying every Motzi Shabbos. There was another yeshiva right next to ours that it was called Chill Zone. And we would go and we would learn Torah, Motzi Shabbos. Instead of like going to the bars or doing whatever, you could come to this place. You could get free pizza, free French fries, like great food, some beers, some l'chaim, whatever. But before you had to study an hour of whatever you wanted to study. So I got hooked up with a Torah mate. I never forget. I met this guy named Moshe Wagner, aka Moyo, and this guy was an absolute stallion, and he was like, "You're from Boston?" "I'm from Boston." In Boston, there's this boys' high school yeshiva there. I used to have to park my truck off campus, so I would walk by this yeshiva, and there's like these little yids, like high school yids, out there like playing basketball, like shouting like crazy things at me. I remember I didn't have my kippah on. I had my kippah in my back pocket, and I remember I stopped, I turned, and I pulled the kippah and I put it on my head, and I was like, "Bros, I'm one of you," right? And they're like, "What? That's crazy." And so like after I would walk by ever again, they would be like, "Yaakov, like come play basketball," So so that was crazy. But anyways, Moyo he studied at that yeshiva, and we made that connection, right? So he became a very close friend of mine. I remember Moyo was like, "We're doing a Shabbaton at the Dead Sea. Like, come, like it's." I was like, "Who's hosting it?" And he was like, "Oh, this organization called Oorah." I'll never forget. I went there. I had an amazing time. I met some incredible people. In May, I came back from Israel. At that point, I had already had orders to boot camp. I'd already had a ship day. Everything was great. It was in line. I remember that I got a text from Moyo saying, "Hey man, you should come to the zone for Shavuos." And I was like, "What's the zone?" And he was like, "Oh, it's this crazy, awesome, like getaway where we hold like all the Yom Tovim and Shabbosim and all this stuff." He was like, "Where are you from?" I was like, "Western Massachusetts." He was like, "Oh, it's like only an hour and a half from there." I was like, "No way." Long story short, it's in this little podunk town that's like just as podunk as mine, maybe a little bit more. And he was like, "You gotta come." So my first ever I had Chill Zone and Oorah exposure in Israel, but this was like my first stateside. I remember I went to Shavuos. I'll never forget. I showed up in like boot cut jeans, a pair of cowboy boots, like a white V-neck, and a straw cowboy hat, right? And like everybody was like, "Who's the dude in the cowboy hat?" And so I spent Shavuos there. I'll never forget. This was crazy. I'll never forget. I went there, and at some point they asked me. We had an incredible time there. At one point, they asked me to get up on stage and say something. I went, and they were like, "Tell us about Yaakov Cruz." And I told a similar story to what I've told you thus far, minus a lot of like the extra details. But I was like, "This is where I'm at. This is what I'm doing. I'm about to enlist in the military, and this is where I'm holding, and this is why I'm doing it." So up until this point, like I was the first guy to graduate high school, first guy to graduate college, first guy now to serve in the military in my family. And I'll never forget, it was like 700 people, maybe 600. This giant ball, grand hall, just like erupted and like gave me a standing ovation when I told my story. And that was crazy. That was mesmerizing. So I came into Oorah pretty late in the game, and the group that they put me in was DU, Discover U, and it was a bunch of guys my age, or within my age range, single guys that are mainly single guys, that were just looking to continue to grow. And it was, there's never any judgment. There's always only praise and encouragement. And DU really stands out because I know, like, at the end of the day, like, those are the boys, you know, like those, like Shabbos is for the boys, you know what I mean? When you have a Shabbos with DU, it's crazy. It's just, honestly, it's that right fit, right? Because, like, everybody in DU is at a similar place in life, and you're able to bounce off ideas and struggles and, you know, accomplishments. And it's so crazy because, like, anyone in DU you can find, you'll be like, dude, I'm going through this. They're like, dude, I'm going through that, right? And so it's crazy to have a network of people that are so close and so personal that you can share your deepest, darkest secrets, and they're like, dude, I'm right there with you. So I told my mom, I said, Mom, I'm not gonna have my phone for Shabbos. I'll call you when it's over. So in her mind, I'm gonna call her Sunday. Well, the Chag went until Monday night. So I didn't call Saturday night. I didn't call Sunday. I didn't call Monday. And then it's Monday night. I remember Israel calls me and was like, dude, you gotta get down to the Venetian. I was like, what do you mean? I'm like, I'm packing all my stuff. He's like, just get down here, right? I was like, okay. So I remember I ran down, I'm sweating, right? There's like 2 state troopers there. Their lights are flashing. They're asking everybody, do you know this guy? Do you know this guy? Right? Finally, Yisrael, like, hesitantly was like, dude, like, the cops are kind of looking for you. I show up. They were like, hey, are you so-and-so Cruz? And I was like, yeah, that's me. And they were like, dude, call your mom. And I was like, what? And they were like, yeah, your mom, like, thinks you're missing. They're like, I was like, that is crazy. I was like, my mom sent you guys? I was like, I didn't even tell her where I was going. She was like, dude, I don't know. I was like, this is a Jewish mom, I guess. Like, somehow my mom figured out where I was. And I think what had happened was I had told my friend I was going to Stamford, New York. My friend had told my mom. My mom called the state troopers and was like, my son's at this Jewish camp in Stamford, New York, and I don't know what happened. And they're like, ma'am, like, we know it's the only camp in Stamford, New York. Like, yeah, we know this place very well. So that's how they found me. And so all these people that just gave me this massive standing ovation, thinking I'm like this super inspirational dude, now think I'm like this murderer. Like, they have no idea. They think I'm just like this crazy dude. They're like, what is going on? Like, they see me getting questioned about it. So that was the end. That whole experience was just crazy. And that was really my first experience of Oorah. It was incredible. I mean, it hit all aspects. I just left boot camp and I found out I was getting stationed in Alaska. And I remember I was driving this little black Kia across the entire United States. I was driving through the mountains of Oregon on my way to Seattle. And it's like 1 in the morning for me, it's like 4 in the morning East Coast. Moshe Wagner called me and was like, hey brother, just want to make sure you're okay and know you're driving. And he spent an hour and a half on the phone with me while I drove through these dark mountains of Oregon just to make sure I was okay. And he reminded me, like, look, man, you're part of the Oorah family. Whatever you need, we have your back, no matter what. And ever since then, it's rang true. You know, I've got so many friends and people who I consider family in this organization that, you know, people have said that I'm inspirational to them, but they have no idea how much inspiration they give to me. They have no idea how much fuel they give me. Living where I live now and dealing with what I deal with now, I find it's hard to get out of bed sometimes, you know, because at some point, sometimes it just feels like you're stuck or like it's hopeless. Like, here you are, this isolated Jew who the only thing he wants is to go to a shul and daven with a minyan and find his besheret, right? And I don't have access to any of that. So Oorah is one of the, amongst the other people that have, all the people I've mentioned before, they're all positive influences in my life. Oorah has stuck by me, and especially recently has sent me whatever I need, allows me to have kosher food, and has my back. As a wise man that I know once said, that it's hard to feel lonely when you have a wolf pack behind you. So, I mean, I feel like Oorah is that wolf pack that I need, and I'm so grateful for all that they do. Yeah, I mean, at this point in my life, they are an incredible source of support. So, grateful for them. So right now, I've been in the Coast Guard for about 2 years. I am an engineer on a ship. I've had the opportunity to save a couple lives. I've had the opportunity to bring closure to family when saving a life wasn't possible. I get some cool side collateral jobs. I get to like work a crane. I get to sometimes like go on a little small boat. We get the opportunity to board boats. I always knew from a young age I wanted to serve my country, so the fact that I got the opportunity to serve was huge, and I take it very seriously. How do I deal with being the only Jew for hundreds of miles? It's crazy. It's a special opportunity, but it comes with a lot of responsibility. You know, there's not a single other person in this town that walk around with this, right? So I have a reputation to uphold for the Jewish people, number one, but number two, like, I'm not just wearing this for fun. This isn't just a costume, right? When Jews are fast asleep on the East Coast after Shabbos is already, they've had their Shabbos meal, they're in bed. I still haven't lit my Shabbos candles. And I know that unless there's some like awesome crazy Jew in like the North Pole, that in North America, I'm the final one to welcome the Shabbos. And that's huge. That's a big responsibility, right? I mean, you're welcoming a queen. And a queen, a new bride, it's incredible. So yeah, that helps keep me in a good mindset. Practically, it's tough. You know, people don't understand why I need separate pans that can't touch each other or can't have certain things in them. People don't understand why I need special sponges or special utensils, and why I can't eat certain things, and why milk and meat can't go together. But honestly, being in Alaska has really forced me to become like my own little expert. And by no means am I an expert, right? But if I can make this work in Alaska, like Miami is gonna be a cakewalk, like Boston's gonna be a cakewalk, New York City's gonna be a cakewalk. Rabbi Rafi is like, he's like the hidden partner. He's like the guy that he stays in the background, but when you need him, he shows up, like Batman almost, right? He sent out the Rafi signal. And this guy really, like, I reach out to him, I check in with, sometimes there have been times where I haven't reached out to him for months and he'll just check in with me, right? I think one of the most inspirational things I got from Rabbi Rafi was this note. I actually have two now because he sent me one this year. But this note when I first got here, I was a couple months in, I said I needed a siddur, and he sent me a siddur, and he said something like, Yaakov, enjoy this siddur, use it well, and just remember that we're all part of Hashem's army. We're all part of Hashem's army. And no matter where Yid is in the world, he is a light unto those nations. Keep strong, your friend Rafi Fried. Something like that. And even just like thinking about it, like, you almost start to tear up, because when I need inspiration, it's so easy to just glance over and look at that. Like when I'm feeling down, it's like, yeah, people love me. And sometimes in positions like this, it's hard to even, sometimes like, especially with things that I've gone through, you question whether or not people love you, right? Like people say they'll love you, but they'll walk out. People say they'll love you, but they won't support you. People say they love you, but only when it's convenient with you. So you start to question, like, you start to question your own existence at some point. And to wake up as like a grown man and just feel like, do I belong here? Like, do people love me? Like, is this my place? And then to be able to just look over and say, we're all part of Hashem's army. You're a light unto the nations. Keep strong. We're here with you. It's kind of like that solid, silent affirmation. Like, yeah, let's take this. Let's turn this next page. Like, let's say this next bracha. Let's get up and let's do our next thing. So. When I first got here, there was like no kosher food. There's one supermarket in town, and I went there and I was like, do you guys have kosher food? And he was like, what's that? Right? And I was like, I had to explain what kosher was, which is weird. And so eventually I talked with the manager, and eventually they got a small selection of kosher food. So now they have like Manischewitz wine, and then they have Manischewitz matzo ball soup. They have a couple other things that are kosher. So my options are very limited. I eat a lot of salmon. It's very easy to catch salmon here, and I have my own teufel knife, and I eat a lot of salmon because it's easy to catch, easy to cook. I eat a lot of vegetables. I eat a lot of cereal, oatmeal. I ate a lot of oatmeal. But unless I get kosher meat shipped into me, there was a time where I didn't eat kosher meat for like 5 months. Like I didn't eat any meat for 5 months, which is tough. Yeah. So that's kind of between learning the laws of kashrut on my own, having to ask other people certain things like Torah mates. It's this huge, huge opportunity, and really it's so simple to do. My Torah mate right now, Israel Teitelbaum, shout out, is become my best friend, and he has also become a guide for me. He's like my unofficial, if I can't get in touch with a rabbi, he's the guy I go to with a question. And so they become more than just somebody you can study Torah with. They become somebody you can venture through life with. I learn something new every day. Like I learned not too long ago that if you have like Parmesan cheese, like it's accustomed to, it's a minhag, I think is the correct word, I could be using that wrong, I don't know. But to wait a few hours after eating like hard cheese, right? Crazy, I didn't know that. But now when I go back home, like if I go back to my parents' house, I have a set of kosher pans. My mother's understanding. She's supportive. When I go home, she makes sure that my kosher pans are out. My dad still gives a little pushback because he's not Jewish, he doesn't understand, but I don't hold it against him. It's how any Beltura father would act if he wasn't familiar with this, especially if he didn't grow up around it. They're becoming more accepting of it. They realize that this is not just a phase. They realize this isn't a joke. They realize that this is the life I want to live. And it's tough. I mean, my dad and I, we hunt, right? So it was one of the hardest things was telling him, hey, I can't eat the deer anymore. And he's like, but it's kosher. I was like, I know, but we didn't ritualistically slaughter it. And he was like, what? And I was like, yeah. I was like, look, I'm gonna shoot all the deer that I'm legally allowed to, and you're more than welcome. Cause he hoards his deer meat. He'll keep it for 2 or 3 years, and he'll be like, oh, I can't eat it. I don't know if I'll shoot a deer next year, right? And then it gets freezer burnt, and I'm like, dude, you're eating freezer burnt venison. So now it's good for him because I can shoot whatever deer I shoot. He knows I'm not gonna eat it, right? So they're becoming more accepting, definitely. I think in time, my goal is I'd like to bring my mother to Eretz Yisrael, God willing. B'ezrat Hashem, in the future she'll go. They realize that this has put me on a better path. I mean, I was a wild child growing up, and I think that this has humbled me and calmed me down a lot. It's forced me to prioritize my morals, my midot, my values. I mean, it's changed a whole lot. I mean, I think they see the growth in the better guy I'm becoming. So I think because of that, and the fact that they see my commitment, because they know I'm stubborn. Once I commit to something, it's happening. When my great-grandparents came over from Poland, survived the Holocaust, they created an incredible network of ancestors. My great-grandparents and my grandparents have hundreds of descendants, dozens of grandkids and dozens of great-grandkids, and out of all those descendants, none of them have picked up the torch and said, I want to follow in the ways of Torah, and I want to follow in the ways of God and of Hashem. In knowing where I came from and knowing where I'm at now, that's probably one of the biggest and most important and motivating factors in my life, is knowing that this is not just for me. 6 million of us didn't die so that I could go and drop the torch. My grandparents and great-grandparents didn't suffer what they went through so I could just go and drop the torch, and so I could just take the easy path, and so I could use my phone on Fridays and eat bacon cheeseburgers. They didn't suffer through what they went through and not so long ago so that I could take the easy way out. And that's something that I really hold close, because I know that at the end of the day, though they're not depending on me, I know that our Jewish heritage relies on me, especially in my family chain. And so I see myself as the last link. And I know that this is such a beautiful way of life. I kind of take it as a personal obligation of mine to say, hey, like, I'm here to carry on what they started. When people ask me, like, what gets me out of bed in the morning, and that's really tough to answer, because, you know, being in Alaska has probably been the hardest time of my life. I'm 4,500 miles away from my family. I have no friends here. I have no family here. I have no community here. I'm on a ship 2 weeks out of the month. I live in a barracks room alone. You know, and I really don't have a whole lot of people here. And it's tough because also, you know, this journey hasn't been just like a cakewalk. Like, I've had people that I love very much walk out of my life because maybe I wasn't religious enough, or so they thought. I've had people who have walked out of my life that I love very much because they thought I was too religious. You know, the people on my ship often say that I'm the first Jew that they met. They don't really understand everything that I do. Most are supportive, or at least understanding, or try to be understanding. But I question sometimes, like, why I do this, right? And the answer really is, it comes down to a couple things. I mean, first, there have been experiences in the past that have forced me to ask, like, why am I doing this? Like, what is it that makes me do this? And I realized that no matter who walks out of my life or who walks into my life or what happens, at the end of the day, all I have is God, and all I have is Judaism. And Judaism has brought me to the exact moment in my life to where I'm supposed to be. Excuse me. The trust in God, just knowing that He's always got my best interest in mind, is a huge motivating factor for me. And honestly, just like externally, really the only thing that gets me out of bed is knowing that I can crush the gym and work out and wake up and daven, and I know that I have another chance at life every day. And I emphasize and I really draw off that motivation, and I draw off those things to really encourage me that when I don't want to get out of bed, that God has brought me to where I am. He watches over me and He protects me, and the least I can do is get up and say Mo Dandy. And the least I can do is get up and wrap the tefillin, and the least I can do is thank Him every time I take a drink of water, or thank Him every time I take a piece of food. It's minimal things, it's not hard. And so those are really the things that drive me. So I don't want anybody thinking like I'm this gold standard, because I'm not. You know, it's hard to maintain this lifestyle, but it's something that I'm always working on. It's something I've committed my life to, something I'm committed to for the rest of my life, but I don't want everyone thinking like this is like a cakewalk, because it's not. It's a battle every day. Like, every day I wake up, it's an absolute battle. It's a battle to stay happy. It's a battle to stay motivated. It's a battle to, sometimes you feel so alone and so isolated, you question why God puts you through this, right? And at those times is when I've learned you need to turn to God most. There's no secret formula. The only thing I can say that has kept me going is the belief and the trust that God always has a plan, and God always has your back. So there's no need to look at me and be like, wow, this guy's amazing, because at the end of the day, I'm just like every other Jew out there. I have my own struggles, I have my own obstacles, I have my own fears, I have my own doubts, I have my own things that get me down. But the one thing that I hold dear is just knowing that if I trust in God, He'll be there for me.